back to my channel and to another video. So last week I did an entire video talking about if Fashion Week was still relevant at setting trends, considering we live in like a more social media world. So if you haven't seen that video, I'm going to be linking it down in the description box. So in that video, I said that I wanted to do an entire video on the history of Fashion Week, but I quickly realized that that is way too much information for one video. So I decided that I'm going to be splitting it up into 4 different videos. So of course, there are multiple Fashion Weeks going on worldwide, but the most important ones are the big 4, being Paris, Milan, London, and New York. And since New York Fashion Week started on September 8th, I figured that I would start off with New York Fashion Week. So yeah. New York Fashion Week was created by Eleanor Lambert, and Eleanor Lambert was born in 1903 in Indiana. She moved to New York in 1925 and briefly worked for an advertising agency in Manhattan. She was later the press director for the Whitney Museum of American Art. She also funded the Met Gala and the International Best Dress List and the Coty Fashion Critics Award, which would later become the CFDA Awards. Among many other things, which I would love to cover in a completely different video, she's such an important piece of like fashion history, especially for New York, that I would love to do an entire video on her because I feel like I'm really summarizing everything that she's accomplished in this one little blurb. In the 1930s and early 1940s, Paris was still seen as the fashion capital of the world. Some American designers would actually take inspiration from designs and trends that they were seeing on the Paris runways. So with the start of World War II, European fashion kind of came into a halt, and Eleanor Lambert saw this as an opportunity for American designers to show their talents and to give New York a chance to become a fashion capital. So thus, New York Fashion Week was born, or as they called it back then, Press Week. The exact same thing happened with the film industry and like the rise of Hollywood, and that is why the United States is like a big powerhouse in the film industry. If you guys want me to do an entire video on that as well, let me know in the comments below. I love that topic and I love talking about it, so if you guys are interested, let me know in the comments below. The first Press Week was held in 1943, and originally it was all taking place in one location, which was the Plaza Hotel, and this was an opportunity for America's most influential publishers and the press to look at the latest collections from American designers. Of course, Press Week was a hit, and within 2 years, businesswoman Ruth Finley, a friend of Eleanor Lambert, funded the Fashion Calendar, a bi-weekly publication that provides industry insiders with contact details, show schedules for all the fashion events in New York. Initially, the focus was just New York, but then later added countries from overseas. Paris and Milan stuck to the format of individual and salon shows. Over the next few decades, Press Week put New York on the map with the help of emerging names like Oscar de la Renta and Ralph Lauren. However, designers began to look elsewhere for the venues for their shows because they really wanted the location to match their collection and also like the vibe of their show. So some locations would be like nightclubs or galleries, stores, or showrooms. In 1962, Eleanor Lambert helped fund the CFDA, which stands for the Council of Fashion Designers of America, and that was a way to promote American designers within the United States and also overseas. By this time, New York Fashion Week was a 2C and B scene event. It was a really hot invitation if you got an invitation to New York Fashion Week, especially with celebrities like Liza Minnelli, Andy Warhol, and Bianca Jagger sitting in the front rows, while designers like Diane von Furstenberg were becoming society page favorites. In 1973, the Battle of Versailles, which is an iconic fashion event, which was organized by the Fédération Française de la Couture. I don't think I pronounced that properly, I kind of read it off the paper, but it was created by Eleanor Lambert as well as the Versailles curator Gerald van der Kemp. The show was held at the Palace of Versailles on November 28, 1973, and it was mainly to raise money for restorations for the Palace of Versailles. The show pretty much put French designers like Yves Saint Laurent, Givenchy, and Pierre Cardin against American designers like Oscar de la Renta, Halston, Bill Blass, and Anne Klein. So as you can imagine, it had a really impressive guest list, so that would include Grace Kelly, Elizabeth Taylor, Josephine Baker, Liza Minnelli, and Jane Birkin. American designers actually used 11 black models for the show, which was unheard of at the time, and American designers and models stole the show with their youthful approach, thus solidifying America's place in the fashion industry. By the 1980s, Paris, Milan, and London had stepped up their game for their fashion shows, leaving New York standing last. So that led to American designers to create bigger and louder shows to be able to compete with the European shows, and Betsy Johnson and Donna Karan led this change. By the 1990s, New York Fashion Week was completely overwhelmed by the organization between designers, buyers, and the press, leaving everybody to kind of run around the entire city just to get from show to show. So Fern Mallis, the executive director of the CFDA at the time, suggested the return of a centralized location at Bryant Park. This gave New York Fashion Week a more cohesive and professional look, and New York Fashion Week flourished with a new wave of celebrities sitting at the front row. This led to some really iconic moments for New York Fashion Week, like the Marc Jacobs grunge show for Perry Ellis in 1993, and the documentary Unzipped, which follows fashion designer Isaac Mizrahi as he plans his fall 1994 collection. In 1998, designer Helmut Lang decided to show his spring collection in New York despite having years of showing in Paris. However, he chose to show it first before any of the European fashion shows had started, so some American designers like Calvin Klein kind of followed suit because they were kind of tired of showing their fashion shows after the wave of European fashion shows and like after Paris Fashion Week. So New York Fashion Week changed its dates for the first and last time from November and April to September and February, so that is why New York always kicks off Fashion Month. The early 2000s brought in some new designers like Rodarte and Alexander Wang. However, one of the most notable things to happen to New York Fashion Week during this time was the cancellation of New York Fashion Week in 2001 due to the tragedy of 9/11. So New York Fashion Week has embraced the whole influencers and bloggers, and this actually led to them having to find like a larger space for their events, so they moved to a more spacious Lincoln Center in 2010. However, due to damage caused near Damrosch Park, New York Fashion Week was forced to move to Tribeca's Spring Studios. In 2011, for the very first time, shows were live streamed from Lincoln Center, including shows by Diane von Furstenberg in partnership with YouTube and Maybelline. This completely changed the way that the public viewed Fashion Week, and it went from being like a really exclusive event for like insiders and celebrities to a more inclusive event where anybody with a computer and a smartphone could watch the shows. So that brings us to now and how New York Fashion Week dealt with the pandemic. So of course, due to restrictions, the spring-summer 2021 season and the autumn-winter 2021 season had to go digital. That was done through like virtual shows, fashion films, or visual presentations. And while some designers stuck to the New York Fashion Week schedule, some designers actually took this as an opportunity to do their own thing and show their collections at their own time. However, there may be more than just a pandemic rocking New York Fashion Week, because a month before the restrictions actually hit, Calvin Klein and Ralph Lauren said they were actually pulling out of the Fashion Week schedule and they were not going to be showing that season. Younger brands like Jeremy Scott actually moved things to Paris to be associated with Paris Fashion Week, while some other designers are actually saying that Fashion Week is too much of an expense. And on top of that, New York Fashion Week in 2019 for the spring-summer 2020 season actually downsized how long Fashion Week is, or New York Fashion Week is, so they went from being one full week of 7 days to 5 days. And that brings us to this year. So New York Fashion Week is currently happening right now, and it's the first show that they're having in 18 months, which is crazy. I feel like pandemic just kind of changed everything. So New York Fashion Week typically brings 230,000 people into the city for the shows and generates about $530 million in visitor spending, which is absolutely insane. But they're actually estimating that this year it's going to be cut in half due to restrictions and the less amount of people that are actually going to be attending the shows. So due to capacities, the shows will be smaller and mostly will be made up of industry professionals and insiders, and a lot of the international media will be missing, as well as some international models, just because of the travel restrictions, while a quarter of the shows will remain digital. So yeah, that's pretty much what is happening with New York Fashion Week this week, and I'm pretty excited to see what collections come out of it. I will personally be keeping up on the Vogue Runway app, whether it's like in-person shows, like photos from the shows, or like whatever virtual presentations or photo shoots they're going to be posting on there. So I'm really excited to see what things come out of it. And yeah, that pretty much wraps up this video. That is the history of New York Fashion Week in a really short bite-sized version of it. I hope you guys like this video. Like I said, I will be doing all the other Big Four fashion weeks, so I will be doing Paris this fashion month season. I will most likely be doing London and Milan in February when the next fashion month comes up. So make sure you guys are subscribed so you don't miss that, as well as make sure you turn on your post notifications so that you don't miss out on any new videos. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye!